Hey guys, #1 Marmaduke fan here. Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess Volume 7 came out a couple months ago. This is kind of like the manga that has framed this channel. My very first video was a review of Volume 1. So we're going to do an in-depth review of this. And then I thought I'd just really quickly tell you about other comics I've been reading. So TLDR for people who haven't been following this series, but I think that Twilight Princess is a masterpiece that's in the act of being produced right now. Next volume's coming out sometime next year. Akira Himekawa have had a long manga career. They've done other stuff besides Zelda, but I think Zelda is the only stuff that's been localized to the United States. And I kind of see Twilight Princess as their capstone. They've spent a lot of time with this character. They love this character and this world. They understand the character. And in Twilight Princess, they're taking all of that and retelling his story, but adding a lot of depth to it. Basically, I think if you play the video game, a lot of the story is implied in the video game, but they never do anything with it. They're interesting little fan theories that people were talking about when Twilight Princess came out. And they're basically saying, okay, we're going to not just imply this stuff, we're going to explicitly talk about some of this time travel stuff. We're going to explicitly talk about some of this character building stuff. And basically they're finding the good story hidden in the game and building a kind of I'd say, J.R.R. Tolkien or C.S. Lewis style epic fantasy story with this character. So where we left off in Volume 6, Link encounters Shadow Link, which is a representation of his hidden sinful desires for self-aggrandizement and glory. He defeats Shadow Link, but as he stabs Shadow Link, he suddenly kind of wakes up and he realizes that Shadow Link is him, so he's stabbed himself. And this is after his partner Midna warns him that the power of the Master Sword is going to his head. One interesting aspect about this is that this whole time, this version of Link has been very hesitant to become a hero. For the whole first part of his journey, horrible things just keep happening to him, and he's just desperately trying to survive. He has almost no power or control over his situation. So when he finally gets the Master Sword, he finally feels like he has some agency and control over his life. He finally feels like he has a destiny to fulfill. And no sooner does that happen than he's basically left for dead. So with that, we open Volume 7 with him grievously injured and being cared for in a barn. There's a nice little flashback to catch you up, and the girl who is caring for him seems a little morose and withdrawn, and she tells him, "The man with a cloak brought you here, and the second that you are able to move, I want you out. I don't want people with weapons around here." There's some interesting stuff where as she's healing him, it hurts because she's disinfecting the wounds, right? So it's sort of you're getting your medicine. It sucks, but you need to go through this pain to be better. Directly connected to what he's going through emotionally right now. I think this is a new character. So one nice point is every time they introduce a new character, they actually use her in a way where it actually feels like they're justified adding a character in this one. And they take some of the little side characters from the video games who, are just kind of in the background, seem like cool people, and they'll give them things to do where it'll kind of justify their existence in having these additional characters. Maybe a side character will help Link find a hidden fortress or something. It's just a neat little addition. So as Link is recovering, he dialogues with his shadow self. Now, this is one example where they're basically seeing something in the video game and they're figuring out, oh, we understand the importance of this. So in the video game, I recall that there are a couple cutscenes where Link encounters Shadow Link, and it's kind of creepy and a little off-putting, but they never do anything with it. You never fall to the dark side with Link. You just have this feeling that he has some sort of inner demon he's struggling with, but it's not really specified. In this, they specify that what Shadow Link is he's literally a manifestation of Link's desire for power and glory. And he has this back and forth with himself where Shadow Link actually helps him. He needs to be violent and aggressive to kill all these monsters and save people. But this aspect of his personality has been taking him over gradually. I've helped you, but you're so ungrateful. I don't care what happens anymore. This guy is really resentful and is kind of angry at the world for all the difficulty he's gone through. And he's really resentful about not being powerful enough. And this bugs Link because he doesn't even feel like this is him talking. He has sort of like this unwanted, shadowy mentality within him that he hates, and he's literally arguing with himself. So this is great because this is almost like kind of Crime and Punishment, and like Dostoevsky's character thinking about murder and hating himself for thinking about murdering someone. It's an argument with Satan. After kind of like telling the thing to be gone, a visitor approaches, and this visitor is cloaked. And I love the dynamism of just like this full page panel to indicate kind of like the haunting presence of this character. And it's a very good cloak game. Now, this is the mysterious ghost of the warrior. So I guess I've got to explain some like Zelda nerd stuff. In the game, it is implied that the guy who teaches you your abilities is a ghost of one of the heroes of the past game. And the prevailing fan theory was that the ghost of the warrior was the ghost of the character you play as in the video game The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. That was the prevailing fan theory, and Akira Imakawa, to their credit, they'd say, yeah, we're going to go with that directly. We're not going to just hint or imply that that's who it might be. We're going to tell you that this ghost is the ghost of Link in Ocarina of Time. He's now appearing to the main character of Twilight Princess to give him some guidance. So I like how they're taking kind of like the fan theory time travel stuff, and they're making that an explicit part of the plot. It would definitely help if you played Ocarina of Time or have at least read the Ocarina of Time manga, but they do a pretty good job of just kind of like explaining that in a very straightforward fashion, so you don't have to go to some fan forum to work it out. So he then, after debating with himself, he now debates with this sort of representation of posterity, a representation of a hero who's come before him. And I freaking love this conversation because one of the like every single classic hero story, the hero is a bit of a jerk. The hero goes on a journey. The hero learns to not be a jerk. The hero becomes a real hero, right? And even some of their like little kid story, even their like stories aimed at little kids go through this same basic pattern. Like if they're aiming it at 8-year-olds, there'll be some like silly adventures, and the kid Link will learn not to be a jerk and to work with other people, and he'll become a hero, right? Now, because Twilight Princess is aiming at an older audience, it's tonally closer to Lord of the Rings, whereas their earlier children's manga are tonally closer to The Hobbit. You need to emphasize that struggle more because there are going to be times, especially as you get to be a teenager or an adult, where you're down in the dumps, you're depressed, you feel like a load of crap, right? And in those moments, it becomes most important of all to be able to kind of like talk yourself through why it is important for you to get back up. It is most important to think about hope and purpose when you are depressed, because to be depressed is to really be giving up your hope. And so what the ghost does is it kind of like forces him to think about this problem in a step-by-step fashion and challenges him with like some really specific points. So I actually kind of want to read it. Power does not inhabit a blade without bravery. I told you that. You lost his aunt? What a poor state you are in. Why did you help? I no longer have any right to be a hero, and my life has no value. And the ghost says, that is not for you to decide. Even if you suffer defeat, fall and flee, unable to bear fear, the fear and the shame, even if you hope for death, you do not have that freedom. This is kind of like a teenage level Hamlet conversation. Hamlet says to be or not to be. That is the question. He doesn't know what to do. Hamlet is contemplating suicide, and he thinks to sleep, perchance to dream. He wonders if he dies, if there'll just be silence, a sleep without any dream, like annihilation of the soul, or maybe he'll go to heaven, or maybe he'll go to hell. And that's what the thought of hell terrifies Hamlet out of his suicidal thoughts, and he has to act. This Link is so defeated that he basically feels like he could just lay down and die at this point, and he needs a hard talking to from a father figure. He doesn't have a father figure, so this ghost of the old warrior is becoming his father figure, urging him on, but also giving him like not just encouraging him, but giving him like a tough talk. Why have you been fighting? What for? What do you fight to protect? Answer. Just really blunt. He thinks about it. You were drunk on the sword's power. How do you feel now, looking back upon yourself at that time? Answer. I don't remember. Was that the real me? A storm was raging inside of me. Rapture, arrogance, pride, despair. and fear. I feel like I experienced many emotions all at once. I only felt good for a mere moment. I wanted to use the sword more and show I had gotten stronger. More. Desire without limit welled up inside. There's a really great segment. Okay, there's a really great section I want to find. But basically, he looks back on like his whole journey thus far. And one of the other neat things I think they're doing is when Akira Himekawa adds something that wasn't in the game, they make sure to like use it. So in the very first volume, it was hinted that there was a magical sword called the sword. I think it's called the Garu's sword or the Garuf's sword. There it is, the Gaurov sword. And this isn't in the game, but he draws the Gaurov sword because as a child he wants to be a hero. And somehow this creates a catastrophe that wipes away his village. It's not explicitly said what happens, but he blames himself for drawing the Gaurov sword because he believes drawing the Gaurov sword brought disaster on everybody he knew in childhood. And he has like real guilt about this later. This really is holding him up from being active and being a hero later in life. And it's because he had this desire, is sort of like childlike desire to be a hero, to be glorious, to have everybody praise and recognize him. And he didn't want to be a hero for the right reason. The only reason to want to be a hero is you're going to go through hell for someone else's sake. You're not doing it for your own sake. Here it is. So I completely lost control. Resentment is dangerous. It comes through in the slightest crack in your heart. It easily upsets the balance you've tried so hard to maintain. That's the ghost speaking, and casts you into darkness. And what creates that resentment? Answer me. So Link thinks, and he says, my immaturity. And the ghost says, not good enough. What do you mean by immaturity? I love this because the ghost isn't just pushing him. The ghost is pushing him to specifically stay. Why am I having this problem? He is not letting him get away with this. He is forcing him to confront what he did wrong so that he can move forward from this point. It's very tight. After he kind of like comes to terms with what he did wrong initially, that helps him get to the point where he figures out what's wrong with him right now. The Dark Link is a false and fake goal, the desire purely for self-aggrandizement. One of the interesting things that comes across is the Triforce in Zelda lore is pure power. Ganondorf, the evil being, can use the Triforce. So the Triforce is pure power that can't distinguish between good and evil. Because of that, if you're given this power and you're an idiot or you're prideful or foolish, basically being given power just creates more opportunity for you to do something more destructive with it. And he had all this power. He didn't really know what to do with it. And he comes to realize that because it doesn't distinguish between good and evil, the responsibility is on him to use this power well. That's really brilliant. The ghost keeps pushing him. I want to show this cool scene where he finally realizes who it is, and he sees kind of like the consequence. It's sort of like the ghost is becoming a symbol of what it means and what you have to bear to be a hero, and it's not fun. You have to bear a burden greater than anyone else bears if you're going to leave a legacy for other people, and that's what he comes to realize. And in the end, he becomes worthy again, and the ghost of the old hero kind of gives him this assurance that you can rise again and correct what you did wrong. We see Midna again, and I love Midna's character arc. She goes from being like a really hostile and combative personality to a really supportive and complex personality, so I love Midna. He then, after he's kind of like solved the problem within himself, he's able to help another person, the girl who's been caring for him. This is another thing. So in the game, I remember there's this little ghost village you go to and you fight, the bad guys there, and it's kind of like a funny little Wild West scene. But they basically tap into why is there a ghost town in this world and realize, well, there's a ghost town because the goblins murdered everybody, right? So they're picking up on little details you might have noticed in the game and developing that. So he's able to kind of like, she's angry at the world because people with weapons caused this problem for her. And she's mad at him because he has a weapon. And basically by being able to connect with her and encourage her, he's able to help her like work through a problem. She blames people who fight evil, and then they can't beat the evil, and then the evil overruns them. So she becomes sort of nihilistic. Why even bother to fight if more people are going to be killed? And he has to give her enough hope that because we value life, we have to fight against evil to defend it. He's learned the lesson. Now he's able to communicate that lesson to someone else. It's really fantastic. And then there's just, if you're like a Zelda nerd, there's so much great stuff for you. They have a nice long conversation between Ganondorf and Princess Zelda. And in the game, spoilers, Princess Zelda just turns into like an evil zombie at the end. And it's a little like out of the blue, like, why did that happen? How did Ganondorf corrupt Zelda? So again, they see something in the game and they think, okay, somehow Ganondorf managed to corrupt Zelda. So we ought to show what that process is. And what's really neat about this is as Link is going through his arc of get off your ass and get back to work, Zelda's facing this arc where her power is symbolically is wisdom. She's facing a intellectual temptation. Ganondorf is trying to intellectually persuade her that his cause is right and that she should join up with his cause, and it's sort of comedically shown as them just sitting down for a little cup of tea. I just love the image of Ganondorf at a fancy little table with a tiny little dainty teacup, and they have like a really complex, interesting conversation where Ganondorf is clearly sophisticated. He, is playful almost. He does some he kind of like playfully jokes that this hardly seems fair. There's two of you with the Triforce and there's only one of me with the Triforce. that seems to be imbalanced. Maybe you should come over to my side. And we again harken back to older things. So one of the other things that Akira Himekawa established in their story is this version of Princess Zelda has a connection with Princess Midna. They communicated with each other as children through like a magic mirror. The Hyruleans were terrified of the Twilight Realm people, so they broke the mirror, or they just kept her from ever speaking to Midna again. And it's this connection that's coming to the forefront because the Hylians basically banished the Twilight Realm people. They didn't care about what happened to them. And Ganondorf is able to use this to his advantage, to use the Twilight Realm to invade Hyrule and achieve his dark magical purposes. So Zelda, kind of in her wisdom, was the only one who recognized the importance of the Twilight Realm. And her childhood connection with Midna is something that she sort of lost and felt bad about all this time. And I actually don't know in what way they're going to develop this, but there's kind of like hints they're going to develop this in maybe an interesting direction where maybe Zelda takes up Ganondorf's cause, or at least maybe drops her guard enough to give him an in. She then kind of explains the backstory where as she's gained wisdom from the Triforce of Power, she's learned about what's happened in the past, in the lives of past Princess Zelda. So there's a kind of a real way in which in gaining those memories, she's become like an avatar of Zelda. You regain the memories of the past Zeldas, you understand like the bigger picture of what's going on, so he can really talk to her as if she was the same person he met 100 years ago. She sort of explains the whole time travel backstory in Ocarina of Time, and how I'm a Zelda nerd, so a lot of this speaks to me. So after the original Princess Zelda plays with time, they create two timelines. There's the timeline in which Link fights and defeats Ganon, the King of Evil, and then they reset time to try to save the world before he takes over the kingdom, which means that they kill off Ganondorf before he has a chance to get possessed by this all-powerful evil force, which if you were Ganondorf would kind of make you mad, right? Like he basically probably feels like he got put on a sham trial for something he didn't think he did. But once he's killed and he rejoins with sort of like the evil force in hell, he regains his memories and is filled with his hatred and desire for revenge. And then there's also like this thing where because there are these two timelines, Ganondorf exists beyond time, so he can enter into either of these timelines, basically causing trouble. They explain it. It's so complicated, Zelda nerd stuff, but they explain it well enough that you're going to be able to follow it, I think. And it just helps you connect with Ganondorf a little bit. Like he's always, in a lot of the video games, he just feels like the final boss who comes out at the end and you have to fight him because you have to fight Ganondorf at the end of a Zelda game. And they basically just connect you with the fact that if you were Ganondorf, it would kind of suck to be perpetually fighting these people forever. And she has a really great line where if we are destined to fight forever, then that means that you are destined to be beaten by Link. I love how there's actually like they're having this little conversation, but there's like an intellectual back and forth between them, in addition to kind of like the plain meaning of the words. And then there's a nice little comedic interlude where as they're having this conversation, Link's still having trouble like falling off of mountains and things, right? So they make sure to like take a break and entertain you as well as have kind of like this interesting back and forth happening. So if you are a Zelda nerd, I think this will absolutely speak to you. If you're not a Zelda nerd and my whole like Zelda timeline travel stuff confused you, don't worry. I think Akira Himakawa, they make absolutely sure that you can follow with what they're going on. They don't get bogged down by the Zelda nerd stuff. They tell the straightforward fantasy story. They explain the fantasy nerd stuff enough so that it's comprehensible. It would be helpful if you are basically familiar with Ocarina of Time or their manga adaptation of Ocarina of Time. But where they're really hitting the nail on the head is that both Link and Zelda have a moral journey. And they're two different kinds of challenges. It's physical challenges and the challenge of pride for Link. It's intellectual challenges and kind of the challenge of self-doubt for Princess Zelda. So a greatest of all time series. I'm just going to real quick like browse through what I've been reading in addition to that, just to kind of like, I don't know. I feel like these may not be worth like their own video, but I just want to kind of like let you touch base on what I'm reading. So this is Star Wars number 16, written by legend Archie Goodwin, art by Walt Simonson and Bob Wiacek. This is like a great example of the fun, goofy Marvel Star Wars adventures where the main characters from the movies almost don't feature at all. It focuses on like this bounty hunter named Valence who hates droids because they're taking her gerbs. But it actually works pretty well. And I kid you not, they have like this whole... Lots of people have joked about how there's a green rabbit named Jax in the Star Wars comics, and, you know, like a spicy little waitress bounty hunter girl named Amaze. Kid you not, they have bad guy aliens named Fudd and Daffy. They're making fun of Looney Tunes in a Star Wars comic. So it's ridiculous. It's fun. It's well drawn. It's well drawn by some really classic art talent. This is such a fun, goofy era of Star Wars history, and it's kind of interesting how they were starting to tell stories with just their completely original cast of wonky characters and some references to the main cast, but they were really building they basically cued in on the fact that Star Wars is a fun, goofy movie serial franchise, and they were willing to lean into goofy stuff like green rabbits with guns. So very fun issue. Green Lantern Rebirth, written by Geoff Johns and drawn by Ethan Van Sciver. This is a good story, but I guess my problem with it is if you don't know much about DC Comics continuity, it's going to be a lot of talking and a lot of catch up on like that one time when Green Lantern was possessed by an evil force and became a bad guy, and all the people are debating, should we trust him and give him a second chance, or is he a bad guy forever? Batman thinks he can never be trusted after what he did. Guy Gardner's willing to give him a second chance. I guess my qualified recommendation is I enjoy it, and I enjoy the seriousness they're taking with like it's hard to have a redemption arc if people don't trust you. I guess my problem with it is most modern comics assume you've read a lot of modern comics to keep up with what's going on, and that's kind of it's like a permeating thing for me in post-2000s comics, and really started kind of like in the 90s, I think. Crisis on Infinite Earths. I want to get the artist name because art in this is fantastic. Penciled by George Perez, inked by Dick Giordano, written and edited by Marv Wolfman. So Crisis on Infinite Earths is kind of an example of comic books starting to get hyper complicated and having multiple universes all ending at once. So I recognize some characters, like from when I read like old 50s Superman comics or whatever. I recognize these guys from like the DC animated movie they made, kind of inspired by these characters. But the problem is this is sort of like the start of things starting to get really... Ironically, they were trying to simplify things and destroy like all of the crazy universes they'd come up with over the years. But this is kind of when they were starting to write stories based on the assumption that you could follow with like all of these crazy alternate universes that DC has. What I really like about this comic is just the fantastic composition layouts throughout it. They do a lot of interesting symmetrical layouts where they'll have like these repeating panels, and then in between them smaller panels, so you have a back and forth conversation going on. Or if it's something like a whole world being destroyed. It'll go from a white explosion to dust to black nothingness, and even kind of like some interesting things with like, I don't know, variety in gutter shapes. And like, it was just like it's artistically, it's experimental, but it's very pretty and very densely packed with a whole lot of little details. I guess the problem is, again, if you don't know a lot of these characters, they're not going to play catch up with you on a lot of these characters. So get ready for like dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of characters dying, some of whom you may not know at all. Avengers, this is Marvel is getting ready for some event, and their idea, whenever they get ready for some event, is they just sort of republish random comic books that feature characters from that event. I guess the theme of this is, because Western superhero comics have become so complicated, even though I really love like these $1 options, I basically think all of these old comic books should be free. Like, they should have legalized piracy to let kids read all of the old comic books so that they can basically have the minimum required reading they need to understand what's going on in all of these new events, or don't do these new events at all. Make really dumbed down to earth, simple adventure stories, and don't worry about like all the big continuity adventures. So the Swordsman is a reprint of Avengers number 19. This is very much in the kind of like the classic era of just a simple little adventure story. The Swordsman's a tough guy who is really proud of himself and thinks he can join the Avengers just because he's a super tough guy. He used to bully Hawkeye when Hawkeye was a kid, so Hawkeye is kind of terrified of what a badass he is. So Hawkeye's having that kind of character arc. Captain America's having this character arc where he wants to join S.H.I.E.L.D., and the other Avengers are kind of annoyed at him because they think he's moonlighting or not taking his Avengers job. So it's like silly little adventure stories, fun fight the bad guy stuff, and some little family dynamic stuff to give it a little bit more, I don't know, soap opera, sitcom, fun, people being jerks and having to learn to work together stuff. A very straightforward, simple adventure story from the era. I want to get the artist. Stan Lee was the writer, of course. That was kind of like his contribution to the medium. And Don Heck is the artist. We'll see more of him. Then, when we get into some later Avengers, this is Avengers 133, the Marvel Universe is becoming like a bigger, complex, more interesting thing. And I guess like my qualified... but I want kids to get into the classic Marvel and DC comics because they are very fun. The problem we have is that it's hard to get into it if you don't know where the heck to hop into it, because the world and the universe starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and there are all these like corners of it you could explore, and you could get lost in it, basically. And I feel like it's fine to have like the bigger universe going on, but the heart of the story has to be simple adventures. I think at this period, they're still making sure to hit like those really nice, straightforward little, personal dramas, and that's what you connect to. And if you want, you can keep reading more and more and getting into this deeper world. Steve Englehart is the author. Sal Buscema, I think the younger brother of John Buscema, and Joe Stanton are the artists. The Buscema style, I think, is marked by beautiful illustration style. I think John Buscema mastered relaxed drawing a little bit more when especially as he was a mature artist, his characters had kind of like this relaxed, I don't know, Michelangelo quality to them, where there was muscle and strength, but they weren't super stiff and have their muscles flexed all the time. He knew how to like work in grace and contrapposto into his figures. Sal Buscema is also a very talented illustrator. This might be an example of his younger work. A little stiff, but one of the legends of the industry. This is starting to tell like this bigger universal story where the Scarlet Witch is trying to control her power, and the Vision is going on this journey to discover his repressed memories from his past, and the Mantis, who's apparently like this immortal character, is going on a journey to learn about like all the secrets of ancient races at the dawn of time. It's fun, it's like this big, sprawling, epic saga. It's very, very verbose, but a lot of things happen. So even though there's a lot of talking, there's also a lot of things happening. So it feels interesting. You get wound up in like this whole epic saga between the Kree and the Skrulls fighting each other throughout the centuries. And then Giant Size Avengers is kind of a continuation of the same thing. Giant Size Avengers number 4. And Steve Englehart is the writer, and Don Heck is back as the penciler. And just to my eye, it looks like Don Heck has really evolved his style in the years that have passed between this older era comic and this would, what would this be? Late Silver Age, maybe early 80s, maybe? I can't pinpoint the date, but all I'm saying is that I think that the art style evolved. This continues the same story with the Vision kind of like finally coming to terms with his full story and his full history, and then he's got to go save his waifu from Dormammu, and they end it with a nice little double wedding at the end. Oh look, they even have like the old school arrows to tell you which way to go. That's how you can spot an old school comic. These fell out of favor in the 90s pretty fast. People stopped using those. And then Kang the Conqueror shows up, and he's up to some evil, like, world-ending stuff. Like, there's just so much going on. It's so... What's interesting about it to me is these are things that would annoy me a lot in comics, but for some reason it worked here. I think it worked for me because I was basically familiar enough with the Marvel Universe that if you show me Krang, Skrulls, and Kree, I basically, oh yeah, I know who the Kree are, I know who the Skrulls are, so I can kind of follow that kind of stuff. I have like a basic understanding of most of the characters, so when they go on like these, mind journeys into their past, I have a feel for them. I know that Scarlet Witch and the Vision are a hot ticket, so that helps me kind of like follow the romance of it. And they also just keep throwing so many insane things at you that just as you're processing it, then they hop to the next thing, and that's kind of fun in its own right. The catch to it is it's complicated. So if this was your first comic, it would be a whole lot to absorb, and you might be missing some little things about the characters, basically to help you interpret it. So I guess that's kind of like been the theme of all of this, is as comics became more of a not a little kid's thing you buy at the newspaper stand, but more of like a middle class thing you buy to collect. They became more complicated because they were then targeting it to an older reader with more capital to spend and more time to read on these long, complex stories. So not bad. That's part of the fun, but if we're going to do that, we need to make it easy for the kids to get into it. Annihilation Kesar is a reprint of The Incredible Hulk 234. I may or may not have owned this as a kid. I do have memories of reading this as a kid, but I don't know if it was the actual comic or if it was one of those Marvel Essentials books. I just can't read Hulk without wanting to kick myself in the butt for giving away my old Hulk comics. But this is not a complicated universe-ending story. This is a basic... the hero's having some trouble, and a bad guy wants to trick him into fighting another good guy because he's got some evil plan. Story, really simple, straightforward superhero story with a nice heart underneath it. This one would be Sal Buscema and Jack Abel as the artists, Roger Stern as the writer. So it's basically the Hulk is wandering around, and he gets invited to a hippie commune by a beautiful lady with one arm, and she kind of tells him her backstory and how she lost her arm. It's supposed to be about Kesar because it's his first appearance. And he literally has like one panel where he says, "Call me Kesar," and that's it. That's his contribution to the story. But really, it's all about the Hulk. And one of the interesting things is I remember this as a kid. The Hulk falls asleep, but he doesn't turn back to Bruce Banner because even when he's asleep, he's still angry and uptight. So he could stay the Hulk for weeks. I just remember that really sticking out at me as a kid and being kind of terrified by that. And then there's this funny little thing where the hippies pretend to be super tolerant and open-minded, but they're all very judgmental of the Hulk, and they can't wait to sell him out to the military-industrial complex. It's of its time. It's kind of poking fun at hippie culture of the time. There's the good girl hippie who's really nice and loving, and then there's like the hypocrite hippie who can't wait to turn around and get somebody just so he feels better. What is it? It's not politics in comics. It's observing things in the culture and bringing them into the comic to give it a little bit more of a feeling of, oh yeah, this takes place in our world in the 1970s. And then the evil villain laughs about how he's going to trick the Hulk into fighting the Machine Man, who's innocent because he sent this imposter at him. Tune in again next week, kids, to find out if the Hulk fights the Machine Man. Of course he will. I think that this is basically what should be the standard if you buy a random comic book, it should have this kind of a feel or this kind of a feel. A dumb, straightforward, simple little adventure story with a heart of gold. And this kind of stuff is a little bit more, I don't know, release it as a book for comic book nerds who want like hyper complicated universe ending stuff. But this isn't a good jumping on point for superhero characters. This kind of a book is a better jumping on point for superhero characters. All right, that's all of my nerdy little thoughts. 35 minutes. I haven't gone that long in a while. All right, Twilight Princess. I have pre-ordered the next volume, so I should get that as soon as it is released, and we will continue our journey. All right, Zelda nerds. Love you guys. Catch you later.